Oregon's defensive line is loaded up with plenty of talent. So it's mailbag time. YouTube comments, Twitter, become a Locked On Ducks insider. All ways to get into the mailbag. Zaheem sent this one in. Between Aydin Breland, Terrence Green, Zadavian Sims, and Tioni Gray, whose traits intrigue you the most / encourage you that they'll see solid playing time next season? Well, not all of those guys are from the same recruiting class. Terrence Green is one of those players from the 2023 haul, same class as Amari Washington. And I like Green. All these guys, when you watch their high school tape, stand out. That's kind of the nature of getting to that level. The question becomes, who's able to take their traits and elevate them into plus attributes in the college game? Because on tape, guys like Terrence Green or Amari Washington, Mateo, Johnny Bowens, all those guys coming out in the 2023 class, you could have watched their film and said, yeah, I see how they're seeing the field early in their careers, or, at least by their second season, they'll be there. But we haven't seen that with all of these guys yet. This is one of the position groups that going into spring practice, I have serious questions about. Not doubts, questions. Because the top two guys are pretty clear. Amari Washington, I'm a huge fan. Big fan of Amari over here. And Bear Alexander, the transfer from USC, who I'm not really sure what happened this past year. He played a few games and then said, all right, I'm not doing this. And then he transferred to Oregon, who have been after him for the last couple cycles. So that felt inevitable on the one hand. But that does not mean transfers are just taking the spot of guys that are on the roster, which is something that gets people all hot and bothered at times. Not everybody, but a select few people. And that's just the way of the world. That's okay. We discuss it here on the show pretty regularly. Amari Washington is one of those in-house developed guys that going into his third year is going to be a full-time starter, I expect. But to go back to your question, Zaheem, I'm most intrigued by Aydin Breland. Now, that doesn't mean I have the biggest expectations for him. I actually think based on the Amari Washington kind of tracking towards playing time, it could be Terrence Green, where we saw a little bit more of Green than Breland this past year, but Breland was also the guy that got in there at the Rose Bowl. The reason Breland intrigues me the most is his combination of power and speed. All those other guys, Tioni Gray, Davian Sims, Terrence Green, they can be really powerful dudes, but Breland has a little bit more agility to his game. That if he maximizes all of those traits and gets close to his ceiling in terms of what he can become, he's got the highest ceiling of them all. I think the recruiting profile, when I watch these guys film, I think any of them can be good players. And heck, two of them could wind up being ahead of Breland going into next season. But Breland had a slightly higher recruiting profile and ranking for a reason, and that's that he has that extra trait. Maybe those other guys can develop that. Maybe Terrence Green being, the most veteran and experienced of the group, not that it's extensive per se, maybe that gives him a leg up on the competition. But I'd go with Aydin Breland in terms of who excites me the most, and any of them could see solid playing time. You got to throw Jericho Johnson into this mix as well, who's a 2024 recruit. And, I've heard good things about Tioni Gray, and I think we saw some of those in the spring game last year when he made, he had a couple moments where he went, hey, that guy looks pretty darn good. And it was his first season of college football. So I'm highly intrigued to see how things play out at practice and what the reports are there. And then what happens in the spring game too, and which of these guys kind of stand out, because you've got two bona fide starters pretty clearly. I'm with you there. I'm with you. Amari Washington, Bear Alexander, top two. Who are the next two? You're losing Jordan Birch, you're losing Derek Harmon, and Jamari Caldwell. Well, Amari Washington slides into a starting role. Well, who's Amari Washington from last year? Can Oregon have 4 interior defensive linemen as they did in 2023 instead of just 3 as they did this past season? They really just played Harmon, Caldwell, and Washington, and then a little bit of Amarion Winston in there as well. But the year before, it was Brandon Dorlus, Taki Taimani, Popo Amavai, and Casey Rogers. It was 4 guys. So do they want to go back to that? Which would create an opportunity for 2 underclassmen to see a big role here. I'm intrigued by the interior of that defensive line. But I think Breland does have the highest ceiling. The highest floor right now, just because he's going into his 3rd year, might be Terrence Green. Nathan asked this question. I respect it, but you'll get my response here in a moment. If we end up with a defensive coaching need, what do you think about Lanning asking Nick Saban? Knee-jerk reaction for me is, of course not. That's a good knee-jerk reaction there, Nathan. But who knows? I'd thought of this a while back, but lost a bit of its luster after I heard Craig read a tweet to the same effect regarding Ohio State this week. Oh, well. Yeah. No. No, that is a no. Simon Cowell here. It's a no from me. I don't think Saban's ever coming back in any capacity. Sure, it'd be cool. You know, he's always had glowing things to say about Dan Lanning, which is awesome to see as an Oregon fan. To watch the greatest coach in the history of the sport, you know, go on College Game Day and say, we knew this guy was going to be great a long time ago and we love him. Now, what else is he going to say in that spot? But he seems pretty genuine to me when talking about him. And Lanning's had a strong reputation for a while, and having learned under Saban, even if it was just for a year or 2 when he was a GA, pretty valuable stuff. But would Saban ever come back, to be Lanning's defensive coordinator or a defensive consultant? He's got no ties to Oregon. No, that would not take place. But hey, like Tom Hardy said in Inception, you mustn't be afraid to dream a bit bigger, darling. So I respect you, Nathan, for dreaming bigger. But no, I don't think that would ever materialize. But with regards to Oregon's defensive staff, it looks like everything's going to be staying in place, which is great because I'm always here for continuity. I think one of the reasons that Oregon has gotten better in each of Lanning's subsequent seasons, I thought he made them better in 22 than they were in 21. I thought the 23 team was better than 22, and I thought 24 was better than 23. A big part of that is they haven't had that many coaching departures. I mean, Tosh Lupoi's been there for all 3 seasons, going into his 4th. Chris Hampton looks like he's coming back. He'll be a defense coordinator one day, but he's coming back for his 2nd season as the co-DC and defensive backs coach, and Will Stein's going into year 3. The only major loss that they've had on staff was Kenny Dillingham. And for a program that's won as much as Oregon in the last couple of years, that's not something you can always say. So I think it speaks to the fact that those coaches really like playing for Dan Lanning and believe in what, they're building and what they can achieve for that team in Eugene. But eventually, I think there will be some more losses. Stein will be a head coach one day. Hampton will be a DC. Maybe Junior Adams wants to be an offensive coordinator somewhere, and with his recruiting prowess, like I was talking about, that's all entirely possible. But for now, Alik Terry's a young up-and-comer. Someone might throw a bunch of money at him to try to get him to leave Oregon. I mean, it's always possible, but the fact that Oregon hasn't had it happen, I think is absolutely a plus for him. But, if they were to have a defensive need somewhere, yeah, Nick Saban's not gonna be that guy. But Lanning go right back to his Rolodex, and I'm sure he would find a good option. I think the biggest coach loss in Lanning's tenure after Dillingham is probably Laughlin, and I bet any one of you that are leaving a comment on this particular subject are going to tell me Rashad Samples is better. I think both guys are really good. Hot take, I know.